Some people wear their past like a badge of honor. Others bury it so deep they forget it exists. But Maya Chen carried hers in ink on her skin, hidden beneath starched military uniforms and carefully rolled sleeves. She thought she had left that world behind forever, when she walked through the gates of Fort Braxton for the first time. She thought no one would ever connect the quiet, unremarkable recruit with the headlines that had once screamed across international news. She was wrong. In a world where military precision meets family secrets, where a single tattoo can unlock decades of buried truth, Maya's carefully constructed new life is about to collide with a past she never knew existed. When Colonel James Morrison sees the symbol etched into her skin during a routine training exercise, his face goes white as snow. Because that symbol doesn't just represent Maya's history. It represents his deepest secret, his greatest loss, and the daughter he thought he'd never see again. Some stories begin with a bang. This one begins with a gasp, a dropped coffee cup, and the earth-shattering realization that sometimes the people we're looking for have been right in front of us all along. Maya Chen had always been good at being invisible. It was a skill she had perfected over 23 years of life, moving through foster homes, group facilities, and temporary placements like a ghost that left no trace. Being forgettable had kept her safe, fed, and alive. So, when she stepped off the bus at Fort Braxton on that humid Tuesday morning in September, invisibility was exactly what she was counting on. The drill sergeant's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. "Line up, maggots. Welcome to your new home for the next 16 weeks. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had the kind of voice that could wake the dead, and the kind of presence that made grown men question their life choices. Maya kept her head down, her duffel bag clutched tightly in her sweaty palm, and tried to blend into the nervous energy radiating from the other recruits. She had joined the army for practical reasons. The military offered structure, purpose, and most importantly, a guaranteed roof over her head and 3 meals a day. After aging out of the foster care system at 18, with nothing but a high school diploma and a fierce determination to survive, Maya had spent 5 years working dead-end jobs, sleeping on couches, and saving every penny she could. The army recruiter had promised her a chance at a real career, college benefits, and the kind of stability she had never known. Maya didn't care about honor or glory or serving her country. She cared about having a place to belong. The first few weeks at basic training were exactly what Maya had expected. Brutal wake-up calls at 4:30 in the morning, endless push-ups, obstacle courses that seemed designed by someone with a grudge against human joints, and drill sergeants who could find fault with the way recruits breathed. Maya excelled at following orders and staying under the radar. While other recruits complained about the food, the schedule, and the constant yelling, Maya quietly went about her business, grateful for the predictability of military life. Her bunk was in the middle of the barracks, surrounded by 18 other women who came from all walks of life. There was Jessica from Alabama, whose thick accent and constant talk about her boyfriend back home made Maya's ears ring. Sandra from Chicago had joined to pay for nursing school and never let anyone forget she was too smart for this place. Jennifer from Oregon cried herself to sleep every night for the first month, sobbing into her thin pillow about missing her family's farm. Maya listened to their stories during the few quiet moments they were allowed, but she never shared her own. When asked about her family, she would mumble something about being from California and change the subject. When the other recruits talked about their plans after basic training, Maya would nod and smile, but never commit to any details about her future. She had learned long ago that the less people knew about you, the less ammunition they had to hurt you. The truth was, Maya had no family to miss, no boyfriend to write letters to, no childhood home to reminisce about. Her earliest memory was of a social worker with kind eyes and a tired smile, explaining that her mother had died and no relatives could be found to take her in. Maya had been 3 years old, standing in a sterile office wearing clothes that didn't fit, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit that would be her only constant companion for the next several years. Foster care had been a revolving door of temporary families, some kind, some indifferent, and some who made Maya understand why some children never got adopted. She had learned to pack light, speak softly, and never get too attached to anything or anyone. By the time she turned 18, Maya had lived in 14 different homes, attended 9 different schools, and mastered the art of emotional self-sufficiency. The other recruits gradually stopped trying to include Maya in their conversations. She wasn't unfriendly exactly, but she had a way of deflecting personal questions and steering conversations away from herself that made deeper connections impossible. They began to see her as the quiet one, the loner, the girl who was competent but unremarkable. Maya preferred it that way. Training was intense but manageable. Maya discovered she had a natural aptitude for marksmanship, much to everyone's surprise. Her small frame and quiet demeanor had led the instructors to expect very little from her, but she consistently scored in the top 10% during shooting exercises. She was also surprisingly good at hand-to-hand combat, moving with a fluidity and precision that suggested natural talent rather than training. "Where'd you learn to fight like that, Chen?" Staff Sergeant Rodriguez asked after Maya had successfully defended herself against a much larger opponent during a defensive tactics exercise. Maya shrugged and mumbled something about taking self-defense classes, but the truth was more complicated. Growing up in the system had taught her that sometimes you had to fight to survive, and she had learned early that speed and strategy could overcome size and strength. The physical demands of basic training didn't faze Maya. She had worked construction jobs, waited tables during double shifts, and once spent 3 months unloading trucks at a warehouse for 12 hours a day. Her body was already accustomed to hard work and discomfort. What she hadn't expected was how much she would enjoy the mental challenges. Military strategy fascinated her. During classroom sessions about tactical planning and battlefield communication, Maya found herself genuinely engaged for the first time in years. She asked thoughtful questions, volunteered for extra assignments, and spent her free time reading military history books from the base library. Her instructors began to notice her dedication and natural intelligence. "You've got potential, Chen," Lieutenant Miller told her after a particularly challenging war games exercise where Maya's squad had outmaneuvered 2 other teams despite being outnumbered. "Have you considered applying for officer candidate school after you finish your initial training?" Maya had stammered something non-committal in response, but the idea stayed with her. Officer training would mean more responsibility, better pay, and a clearer career path. It would also mean more scrutiny, background checks, and attention. Things that made Maya nervous for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. The weeks blended together in a routine of physical training, classroom instruction, and field exercises. Maya's confidence grew along with her skills. She began to believe that maybe, finally, she had found a place where she could build something resembling a real life. The army valued competence over charisma, results over relationships. Maya could excel in this environment without having to reveal the painful emptiness of her past. But military life also meant medical examinations, uniform fittings, and situations where privacy was a luxury rather than a right. Maya had managed to keep her left shoulder covered during the initial medical screening, but she knew it was only a matter of time before someone noticed the tattoo that marked her skin just below her collarbone. The tattoo was small but intricate, a delicate cherry blossom branch with 3 flowers, and a series of Chinese characters underneath. Maya had gotten it on her 18th birthday, with money she had saved from her part-time job at a fast food restaurant. The tattoo artist had been hesitant to work on someone so young, especially when Maya couldn't provide a clear explanation of what the symbols meant. "Are you sure about this?" the artist had asked, studying the design Maya had drawn on a crumpled piece of paper. "These characters are pretty specific. They're not just decorative." Maya had insisted she was certain, though she couldn't explain why the design felt so important to her. Something deep in her memory connected to those symbols, though she could never quite grasp what it was. The tattoo felt like claiming a piece of herself that had always been missing, even if she didn't understand what that piece was. Now, months later, Maya still didn't fully understand the meaning behind the ink on her skin. She had tried researching the characters online, but the results were confusing and contradictory. Some sources suggested they were related to family or honor, while others indicated they might be names or places. Maya had eventually stopped looking, deciding it was enough that the tattoo meant something to her, even if that meaning was unclear. As basic training entered its final month, Maya felt cautiously optimistic about her future. Her performance evaluations were consistently high, her physical fitness scores had improved dramatically, and she had even started to develop friendly relationships with a few of her fellow recruits. Not deep friendships exactly, but comfortable associations that made the days more pleasant. The incident that would change everything happened on a Thursday afternoon during what was supposed to be a routine field exercise. Maya's unit was practicing tactical movements in full gear when the unseasonably warm weather and intense physical activity caused several recruits to overheat. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez ordered everyone to remove their outer jackets and continue the exercise in their moisture-wicking undershirts. Maya hesitated for a moment, her hand on her jacket zipper. In the chaos of sweating, exhausted recruits stripping down to cool in layers, she hoped her momentary pause would go unnoticed. But when she finally removed her jacket, the late afternoon sun hit her left shoulder, illuminating the cherry blossom tattoo for anyone who happened to be looking in her direction. Most of the other recruits were too focused on their own discomfort to pay attention to Maya. But Colonel James Morrison had chosen that exact moment to observe the training exercise from a nearby hill. He had been watching through binoculars, evaluating the performance of the new recruits, and making mental notes about potential leadership candidates. Colonel Morrison was a career military man with 28 years of service and a reputation for being fair but demanding. He had commanded troops in 3 different conflicts, earned numerous commendations for his strategic thinking, and was respected throughout Fort Braxton for his dedication to developing young soldiers. At 54, he was considering retirement but wanted to finish training one more class of recruits before stepping down. When his binoculars focused on Maya Chen removing her jacket, Colonel Morrison was initially making a routine assessment of her physical conditioning and tactical awareness. But when the sun caught the tattoo on her shoulder, his careful military composure cracked like thin ice. The binoculars slipped from his suddenly trembling hands, clattering against the rocks at his feet. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment, the disciplined soldier who had faced enemy fire without flinching felt like he might collapse. Because the design on Maya Chen's shoulder was identical to a tattoo he had seen only once before, 24 years ago, on a young woman named Li Wei, who had told him it represented their daughter's name and birth date in traditional Chinese characters. Colonel Morrison had been a young lieutenant stationed in Seoul when he met Li Wei. She was a translator working for the American embassy, brilliant and beautiful, and completely unlike anyone he had ever known. Their relationship had been intense but brief, complicated by military regulations and cultural differences that seemed impossible to bridge. When Li Wei told him she was pregnant, Morrison had been prepared to leave the military and marry her immediately. But Li Wei had other plans. She was scheduled to return to China to care for her ailing mother, and she insisted that a mixed-race child would face too many challenges in either country. She wanted their daughter to be adopted by a good American family, somewhere far from military bases and international complications. Morrison had argued, pleaded, and even threatened to go absent without leave to follow her, but Li Wei had been adamant. The last time Morrison saw Li Wei was in a small apartment in Seoul, where she showed him the tattoo she had gotten to commemorate their daughter's birth. The cherry blossom design with their daughter's name, Mei Ling, and birth date written in characters that Li Wei's grandmother had personally selected for their beauty and meaning. Li Wei had explained that cherry blossoms represented the fleeting nature of life and the importance of treasuring precious moments before they were gone. "Promise me you'll never look for her," Li Wei had said, her hand covering the fresh tattoo on her shoulder. "Promise me you'll let her have a chance at a normal life without the complications of our choices," Morrison had promised, though it had felt like tearing his heart out of his chest. He had returned to his unit, thrown himself into his military career, and spent the next 24 years trying to forget the daughter he had never held. He had never married, never had other children, and never stopped wondering what became of Mei Ling. Now, standing on a hill overlooking a routine training exercise, Colonel Morrison stared at a young woman whose Chinese-American features, whose age, whose very presence seemed to confirm the impossible. Maya Chen was wearing his daughter's name on her skin, in the exact design that Li Wei had shown him all those years ago. Morrison's hand shook as he retrieved his binoculars and focused them on Maya's face. The resemblance to Li Wei was subtle but unmistakable. The same delicate bone structure, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of holding her head when she was concentrating. But there were also features that Morrison recognized as his own: the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she stood with her weight slightly forward, ready to move quickly in any direction. As Maya continued with the training exercise, completely unaware that her world was about to change forever, Colonel Morrison stood frozen on the hillside, wrestling with the implications of what he had discovered. His promise to Li Wei echoed in his memory, but so did 24 years of wondering and regret. Maya Chen Mei Ling was right here under his command, building the kind of military career that Morrison himself had devoted his life to. The training exercise continued below, but Morrison no longer saw tactical movements and physical conditioning. He saw his daughter learning to be a soldier, excelling in an environment he understood better than anyone. He saw a young woman who had clearly faced challenges and emerged stronger, just as Li Wei had predicted. And he saw an opportunity to finally learn about the child he had been forced to give up, even if it meant breaking a promise he had kept for more than 2 decades. Maya finished the exercise without noticing the colonel's presence on the hillside. She put her jacket back on, gathered her gear, and fell into formation with the other recruits for the march back to barracks. She was thinking about the upcoming written exam on military law and wondering if she would have time to study before evening chow. She had no idea that her carefully constructed anonymity had just been shattered by a man who had spent half his life wondering if she was alive and well. Maya Chen was about to discover that sometimes the past catches up with you in ways you never expected, and that family can appear in the most unlikely places, wearing the uniform of the institution that had finally given her a home. Colonel Morrison didn't sleep that night. He lay in his quarters staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment he had seen Maya's tattoo through his binoculars. Every logical part of his mind insisted that the resemblance could be a coincidence, that thousands of young Chinese-American women might have similar tattoos, that 24 years of wondering about his daughter had finally driven him to see connections that weren't really there. But his heart knew better. The tattoo was too specific, too exact. Li Wei had designed it herself, incorporating symbols that her grandmother had taught her, arranging them in a pattern that held deep cultural significance. The chances of another young woman having an identical design were virtually impossible. Maya Chen was his daughter. He was certain of it in a way that bypassed logic and went straight to the bone-deep recognition that only a parent could understand. The next morning, Morrison arrived at his office 2 hours earlier than usual. His first impulse was to pull Maya's personnel file immediately, but military protocol demanded careful consideration. As Maya's commanding officer, he had legitimate reasons to review any recruit's records, but he also had professional obligations that complicated personal interests. If Maya really was his daughter, his relationship to her could affect his ability to evaluate her fairly and could compromise the integrity of her training. Morrison spent an hour pacing his office, wrestling with ethical considerations and military regulations. Eventually, he decided that his responsibility as a commanding officer to know his troops outweighed his personal concerns. He requested Maya's complete file from the administrative office, telling himself he was simply conducting a thorough review of a promising recruit's background. Maya Chen's military records were impressively complete, but personally sparse. Her academic scores were above average, her physical fitness evaluations were steadily improving, and her psychological profile indicated strong resilience and adaptability. But the personal history section read like a masterpiece of bureaucratic emptiness. Listed birthplace, Los Angeles, California. Listed parents, unknown. Ward of the state from age 3 to 18, a string of foster placements, each lasting between 6 months and 2 years. No criminal record, no medical issues of concern, no emergency contacts listed. Morrison's hands trembled as he read the birth date. March 15th, the same date Li Wei had whispered to him in that Seoul apartment 24 years ago. The pieces were falling into place with mathematical precision, but each confirmation felt like another weight added to his chest. The most telling detail was buried in the social services documentation that had been included with Maya's military application. When she had aged out of foster care, Maya had requested access to her original placement records, hoping to find information about her biological parents. The social worker's notes indicated that Maya's original intake form had listed her name as Mei Ling, and noted that she had been wearing a jade bracelet with Chinese characters when she was placed in care. The bracelet had been lost years earlier during one of her foster placements, but the description matched the one Li Wei had shown Morrison when she explained their daughter's name. Morrison closed the file and leaned back in his chair, feeling the full weight of 24 years of separation settling on his shoulders. Maya had grown up without parents, moving from home to home, never knowing that she had a father who thought about her every day. The life Li Wei had wanted for their daughter, stable, normal, free from the complications of their choices, had never materialized. Instead, Maya had faced exactly the kind of challenges that Li Wei had hoped to prevent. The irony was overwhelming. Li Wei had insisted that their daughter needed protection from military life and international complications, but Maya had ultimately chosen the army herself. She was thriving in the structured environment that Morrison understood better than anyone. The qualities that made her an excellent recruit, self-reliance, adaptability, quiet strength, were the same traits that had helped her survive in childhood without permanent family connections. Morrison spent the rest of the morning staring out his office window, watching new recruits participate in morning physical training. He spotted Maya immediately, her small frame moving efficiently through exercises that left larger recruits gasping for breath. She was helping a struggling classmate with proper form for push-ups, demonstrating the kind of quiet leadership that military instructors valued highly. The question that haunted Morrison was what to do with his knowledge. Military regulations prohibited personal relationships that could affect command decisions, but those rules had been written with romantic relationships and friendships in mind, not situations where a commanding officer discovered he was training his own child. Maya had no idea who Morrison was, and she was succeeding in her training based entirely on her own merit. Revealing their relationship could disrupt her progress, and forced both of them into an administrative nightmare. But Morrison also understood that Maya had spent her entire life without knowing her family history. She had grown up with questions that he could answer, with a sense of incompleteness that he could potentially heal. The tattoo on her shoulder proved that some part of her was still searching for connections to her origins, even if she didn't fully understand what those connections were. Morrison's internal struggle was interrupted by a knock on his office door. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez entered with a clipboard full of recruit evaluation forms and a concerned expression that immediately put Morrison on alert. "Sir, I wanted to discuss one of the recruits in the current class," Rodriguez said, settling into the chair across from Morrison's desk. "Maya Chen. She's performing well overall, but there's something I can't quite figure out about her." Morrison felt his pulse quicken but kept his expression neutral. "What kind of something?" "She's got skills that don't match her background," Rodriguez explained, flipping through his notes. "According to her file, she's never had formal military training, martial arts instruction, or weapons experience. But she moves like someone who's been trained in combat techniques. Her shooting scores are consistently excellent, and during hand-to-hand combat exercises, she demonstrates tactics that most recruits don't learn until advanced training." Morrison nodded carefully. "Some people have natural aptitude." "Yes, sir. But this is different," Rodriguez continued. "Yesterday, during the obstacle course, she helped 3 other recruits who were struggling, but she modified the standard techniques we teach. The modifications were more efficient than our normal methods. When I asked where she learned them, she claimed she figured them out on her own. But some of those techniques are based on principles from martial arts systems that take years to master." Morrison felt a chill of recognition. Li Wei had been trained in several traditional Chinese martial arts, skills she had learned from her grandmother, alongside calligraphy and traditional medicine. If those abilities could be inherited, or if Maya had somehow been exposed to similar training during her childhood, it might explain her unusual competence. "Are you suggesting she's lying about her background?" Morrison asked. "Not lying exactly," Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "More like she genuinely doesn't remember or understand where her skills come from. It's like she's operating on muscle memory from training she can't consciously recall. I've seen it before with recruits who had traumatic childhoods. Sometimes they block out periods of their early life but retain physical skills they learned during those times." Morrison's mind raced. Maya had been 3 years old when she entered foster care, old enough to have learned basic movement patterns and reflexes, but too young to have conscious memories of specific training. If Li Wei had been teaching their daughter traditional techniques before returning to China, Maya might retain those abilities without understanding their source. "What's your recommendation?" Morrison asked. "I think Chen has potential for advanced training, but I'm also concerned about the gaps in her personal history," Rodriguez said. "She's isolated herself from the other recruits, never talks about her family or background, and deflects any personal questions. Combined with her unusual skills, it makes me wonder if there's something in her past that could affect her security clearance or her ability to work in sensitive positions." Morrison felt the weight of his impossible situation growing heavier. Rodriguez's concerns were legitimate from a military perspective, but they were based on exactly the kind of scrutiny that could expose Maya's connection to Morrison. If the army decided to conduct a deeper background investigation, they might uncover details about Maya's birth that could lead back to Morrison's relationship with Li Wei. "I'll review her file more carefully," Morrison said finally. "In the meantime, continue evaluating her based on current performance. If she's excelling in training, that's what matters most." Rodriguez nodded and left, but Morrison could see that the staff sergeant remained concerned. Military culture valued transparency and accountability, and Maya's mysterious competence was exactly the kind of anomaly that made seasoned soldiers uncomfortable. That afternoon, Morrison decided he needed to observe Maya more closely without attracting attention. He made it his practice to visit different training exercises throughout the week, so his presence at combat techniques instruction wouldn't seem unusual. What he saw confirmed everything Rodriguez had described. Maya moved with a fluid precision that set her apart from every other recruit. During defensive exercises, she anticipated attacks before they were fully developed and responded with techniques that were both effective and economical. When paired with larger, stronger opponents, she used leverage and timing rather than force, redirecting energy instead of meeting it head-on. These were advanced concepts that most soldiers didn't master until years of experience had taught them the limitations of relying on strength alone. But what struck Morrison most was how unaware Maya seemed of her own abilities. She helped struggling classmates with genuine patience, breaking down complex movements into simple steps as if she were remembering rather than teaching. When instructors praised her performance, she looked genuinely surprised, as if she couldn't understand why anyone would find her abilities remarkable. During a brief water break, Morrison found himself close enough to overhear Maya talking with Jessica, the recruit from Alabama who had been struggling with hand-to-hand combat techniques. "I don't understand how you make it look so easy," Jessica was saying, rubbing her shoulder where she had taken a hard fall during a throwing exercise. Maya shrugged, the same gesture Morrison had noticed in her personnel evaluation interviews. "It's not really conscious," she said. "I just sort of feel where the balance points are, you know? Like when you're about to fall, your body automatically knows which direction to move to catch yourself." "But you're doing way more than catching yourself," Jessica pointed out. "You're actually using your opponent's momentum against them. That's advanced stuff." Maya looked genuinely puzzled. "Is it? I mean, it just seems logical. If someone's already moving in a direction, it's easier to help them keep going that way than it is to try to stop them." Morrison felt his breath catch. Maya was describing fundamental principles of traditional Chinese martial arts, concepts that Li Wei had spent years studying with masters who traced their lineage back centuries. But Maya was talking about them as if they were obvious, natural responses rather than sophisticated techniques requiring extensive training. That evening, Morrison sat in his quarters with a bottle of bourbon and a collection of memories he had tried to bury for more than 2 decades. He pulled out a small wooden box from the back of his closet, a container that held the only physical reminders of his time with Li Wei. Inside was a single photograph of Li Wei laughing at something Morrison had said, her face bright with the kind of joy that made everything else in the world seem irrelevant. There was also a letter she had written to him shortly before returning to China, explaining her decision to give up their daughter for adoption. Morrison had read the letter hundreds of times over the years, but tonight he focused on passages he had previously skipped over because they were too painful to consider carefully. Li Wei had written about her grandmother's influence on their daughter's early development, how even as a toddler, Mei Ling had shown unusual balance and coordination. Li Wei had attributed this to daily exercises they practiced together, simple movements that were designed to build physical awareness and emotional centering. "Grandmother says Mei Ling has the potential to be extraordinary," Li Wei had written. "She moves with purpose even when she doesn't understand what that purpose is. But I fear that extraordinary children face extraordinary challenges, and I want our daughter to have the gift of an ordinary, stable life." Morrison had always assumed that Li Wei's talk of Mei Ling's potential was simply the natural exaggeration of a proud mother. But now, watching Maya demonstrate abilities that seemed to come from genetic memory rather than conscious learning, Morrison wondered if Li Wei's grandmother had recognized something truly unusual in their daughter. The more Morrison considered the implications, the more complicated his situation became. Maya wasn't just his biological daughter. She was a young woman with remarkable natural abilities that she didn't understand and couldn't explain. Her foster care experience had taught her to hide her uniqueness rather than develop it, but the military environment was allowing those suppressed talents to emerge. Morrison realized that his decision about whether to reveal their relationship would affect not just their personal connection, but Maya's entire future. If he remained silent, she would continue developing as a soldier based on her own merit, but she would never understand the source of her abilities or have answers to questions about her identity. If he told her the truth, he would give her the family history she had always lacked. But he would also force both of them to navigate uncharted territory in terms of military regulations and personal relationships. The bourbon didn't provide clarity, but it did help Morrison acknowledge what he had been avoiding all day. His promise to Li Wei had been made 24 years ago by a young man who thought he understood what was best for a child he would never see again. But Maya wasn't a hypothetical daughter who needed protection from her father's choices. She was a real person who had already faced every challenge Li Wei had tried to prevent, and she had not just survived but thrived. Morrison fell asleep in his chair that night, still holding Li Wei's letter, and still wrestling with the most important decision of his military career. In his dreams, he saw Maya as a 3-year-old child reaching for him with small hands. But every time he tried to reach back, military regulations and past promises held his arms at his sides. When he woke up, the bourbon was gone, and Maya was scheduled for advanced tactical training that afternoon, training that Morrison had personally designed to identify recruits with exceptional leadership potential. The collision between past and present was accelerating, and Morrison was running out of time to decide whether he would remain a silent observer or finally claim the daughter he had been forced to abandon. Maya woke up that Friday morning with an unusual sense of anticipation. Today marked the beginning of advanced tactical training, a phase of basic training that would determine which recruits had potential for leadership positions and specialized assignments. She had been looking forward to this challenge for weeks, sensing that the complex problem-solving and strategic thinking involved would finally give her a chance to use abilities she had always known she possessed, but had never been able to fully explain. What Maya didn't know was that Colonel Morrison had barely slept, spending the early morning hours in his office reviewing training protocols and wrestling with decisions that could change both their lives forever. He had ultimately chosen to proceed with the advanced training as planned, telling himself that observing Maya's performance in more complex scenarios would help him understand the full extent of her abilities before making any irreversible choices about their relationship. The advanced tactical training took place in a specially constructed facility designed to simulate urban combat environments. Recruits would work in small teams to navigate obstacles, gather intelligence, and accomplish specific objectives while adapting to changing conditions and unexpected complications. The exercises were designed to identify natural leaders, strategic thinkers, and soldiers who could maintain effectiveness under extreme pressure. Maya was assigned to a team with 4 other recruits: Jessica from Alabama, Marcus from Detroit, Sarah from Portland, and David from Texas. It was an interesting mix. Jessica was enthusiastic but impulsive, Marcus was strong and reliable but tended to follow rather than lead. Sarah was analytical but sometimes got paralyzed by overthinking, and David was confident to the point of arrogance but had good instincts for tactical planning. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez briefed them on their first scenario. Their team was tasked with infiltrating a simulated enemy compound to retrieve classified documents while avoiding detection by guards and surveillance equipment. They had 2 hours to plan their approach and 4 hours to execute the mission. Success would be measured not just by whether they accomplished their objective, but by how efficiently they worked together and how creatively they solved unexpected problems. Morrison positioned himself in the observation booth where instructors monitored the exercises, telling himself he was there to evaluate all the recruits, not just Maya. But his attention focused immediately on his daughter as the team began their planning phase. Maya listened carefully as her teammates discussed various approaches, but she didn't immediately speak up. Morrison recognized this behavior from his review of her training records. Maya consistently demonstrated leadership through quiet competence rather than vocal assertion. She absorbed information, analyzed options, and then acted decisively when action was required. So we're thinking, 2 people create a distraction at the front entrance while the other 3 go in through the back, David was saying, sketching a rough diagram on the whiteboard provided for planning. Simple and straightforward. But the guard rotation means the back entrance is only unmonitored for 6 minutes every hour, Sarah pointed out, consulting the intelligence briefing they had been given. That's not enough time to get in, locate the documents, and get out. Then we make it enough time, David replied. We move fast and don't overthink it. Maya had been studying the facility layout silently, but now she looked up from the papers spread in front of her. What if we're approaching this backwards? She said quietly. Her teammates turned to look at her. Maya so rarely volunteered opinions during group discussions that when she did speak, people tended to listen. Instead of trying to avoid the guards, what if we use them? Maya continued. Look at the surveillance schedule. There's a blind spot in the monitoring room for 90 seconds every time they switch camera feeds. If we could trigger the compound's fire alarm during that window, the guards would have to follow evacuation protocols. That would clear our path to the documents and give us plenty of time to complete the mission. Morrison leaned forward in the observation booth. Maya's suggestion demonstrated several advanced tactical concepts, using enemy procedures against them, creating opportunities rather than waiting for them, and thinking systematically about how different elements of a complex situation could be manipulated to achieve desired outcomes.
How do we trigger the fire alarm without getting caught?
Marcus asked. Maya pointed to the facility diagram. The alarm system is connected to smoke detectors in the ventilation system. If we could introduce smoke into this air intake here, it would trigger alarms throughout the building without requiring us to access the interior. And how exactly do we create smoke without, an actual fire? Jessica asked. Maya smiled, the first genuine smile Morrison had seen from her during all his observations. Dry ice and warm water. Creates a lot of visible vapor that would register on smoke detectors but wouldn't set anything actually on fire. The maintenance shed has both. Morrison felt a surge of recognition and pride that caught him completely off guard. Maya's solution was elegant, practical, and demonstrated exactly the kind of creative thinking that made exceptional military leaders. But more than that, her approach to the problem, identifying hidden connections between seemingly unrelated elements, was identical to strategic methods Morrison had developed during his own career. David looked skeptical. That seems overly complicated. Why not just stick with the original plan? Maya shrugged. Because the original plan depends on perfect timing and luck. This plan creates the conditions we need instead of hoping those conditions will happen naturally. Sarah was already running calculations on her notepad. If Maya's right about the smoke triggering a building-wide alarm, and if the guards follow standard evacuation protocols, we'd have at least 15 minutes of unrestricted access to the building. That's more than enough time to locate and retrieve the documents. Morrison watched as Maya's teammates gradually embraced her strategy, with each person contributing refinements and backup plans. But what impressed him most was how Maya coordinated their efforts without taking over the discussion. She had provided the conceptual framework, but she encouraged others to develop the specific details, ensuring that everyone felt invested in the plan's success. The execution phase of the exercise exceeded Morrison's expectations. Maya's team moved with precision and coordination that belied their short training period. Maya herself demonstrated an intuitive understanding of timing and positioning that allowed her to anticipate problems before they developed and adjust the plan in real time without disrupting overall coordination. When a security guard deviated from his expected patrol route, Maya signaled her team to adjust their positions, using hand signals that weren't part of standard military communication, but was somehow perfectly clear to her teammates. When the dry ice smoke triggered the fire alarm exactly as predicted, Maya led her team into the building with confidence that suggested she had been navigating similar environments for years rather than minutes. Morrison found himself holding his breath as he watched Maya locate the classified documents in a locked filing cabinet. Instead of trying to force the lock, she studied the cabinet's construction for a moment, then used a technique involving leverage and pressure points that opened the drawer without leaving evidence of tampering. Where had she learned lock manipulation techniques that weren't taught in basic training? The team completed their mission with 47 minutes to spare, retrieving all required documents while leaving no trace of their presence. Their performance was flawless, but Morrison's attention was entirely focused on Maya's natural leadership and her demonstration of skills that should have taken years to develop. During the debriefing session, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez praised the team's creativity and execution, but he pulled Morrison aside afterward with the same concerned expression he had worn 2 days earlier. "Sir, we need to talk about Chen again," Rodriguez said once they were alone. "What I saw today goes beyond natural aptitude. She demonstrated advanced tactical thinking, improvised communication methods, and technical skills that aren't part of our curriculum. Either she's had extensive training that isn't reflected in her records, or what?" Morrison prompted. Rodriguez hesitated. "Or she's some kind of prodigy who's been hiding her abilities. But prodigies don't usually end up in the foster care system without someone noticing their potential. Something about her background doesn't add up." Morrison felt the walls of his carefully maintained neutrality beginning to crumble. Rodriguez's observations were accurate, and there were exactly the kind of red flags that would trigger a comprehensive background investigation. If military intelligence decided to investigate Maya's unusual competencies, they would eventually uncover details about her birth parents that would expose Morrison's relationship to her. "What do you recommend?" Morrison asked. "I think we need to consider fast-tracking her for officer candidate school," Rodriguez said. "But I also think we need a clearer picture of her background before we make any decisions about security clearances or sensitive assignments. Her abilities are impressive, but unexplained talent can be a liability in certain contexts." Morrison nodded, understanding the subtext. Military intelligence was always concerned about recruits whose capabilities couldn't be traced to documented training or experience. Maya's mystery background combined with her remarkable skills could be interpreted as evidence of foreign training or undisclosed connections that might compromise her loyalty. "I'll handle the background review personally," Morrison said. "Continue evaluating her based on performance, but document any additional concerns."
That evening, Morrison found himself walking the perimeter of the training facility, trying to process everything he had observed.
Maya wasn't just his daughter. She was a young woman with exceptional abilities that she couldn't explain and that threatened to expose both of them to scrutiny that neither was prepared to handle. Morrison's phone rang as he completed his third lap around the compound. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but when he answered, the voice on the other end sent chills down his spine. "Colonel Morrison? This is Dr. Helen Chang from the International Red Cross. I'm calling about a death notification that's been delayed for several years due to administrative complications. Are you James Morrison, formerly Lieutenant Morrison, who was stationed in Seoul from 1998 to 2002? Morrison stopped walking. Yes, that's me. I'm sorry to inform you that Li Wei passed away 3 years ago from complications related to cancer. She had been living in Beijing and working as a translator for humanitarian organizations. Before her death, she left specific instructions that you should be contacted if anything happened to her. Morrison felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Li Wei was dead. The woman who had given birth to his daughter, who had made him promise never to look for their child, who had shaped every decision he had made about his personal life for the past 24 years, was gone. Did she? Morrison's voice caught. Did she leave any other messages? Dr. Chang's voice was gentle. She wanted you to know that she never regretted her decision to place your daughter for adoption, but she also wanted you to know that if circumstances ever brought your daughter back into your life, she hoped you would give her the family connection she never had. Morrison closed his eyes, feeling the weight of Li Wei's final gift to their daughter. Even in death, Li Wei was giving him permission to claim the relationship he had been forced to abandon. Dr. Chang, Morrison said carefully, did Li Wei ever mention what happened to our daughter? Whether the adoption was successful? There was a pause on the other end of the line. She only said that she hoped your daughter would find her way to you when she was ready, and that you would recognize her when that time came. She seemed to believe that some connections are too strong to remain hidden forever. After Dr. Chang hung up, Morrison stood alone in the darkness surrounding Fort Braxton, finally understanding that his discovery of Maya was not coincidence but inevitability. Li Wei had known that their daughter would eventually find her way into his life, and she had trusted him to handle that reunion with wisdom and love. The next morning, Morrison made his decision. He requested a private meeting with Maya, officially justifying it as a performance review for exceptional recruits. But privately, he prepared to tell his daughter the truth about her family, her abilities, and the parents who had loved her enough to give her up, and who had never stopped hoping she would find her way home. Maya had never been called to a private meeting with a commanding officer before, and she spent the morning trying to figure out what she might have done wrong. Her performance evaluations had been consistently positive. She hadn't violated any regulations that she could remember, and her recent success in advanced tactical training should have put her in good standing with her instructors. But military culture had taught Maya that exceptional performance could sometimes draw unwanted attention. She had learned to be competent without being conspicuous, helpful without being memorable. The fact that Colonel Morrison wanted to meet with her privately suggested that her careful balance between excellence and invisibility might have failed. Maya knocked on Colonel Morrison's office door at exactly 1400 hours, as instructed. When his voice called for her to enter, she stepped inside and snapped to attention with the crisp precision that basic training had drilled into every recruit. Recruit Chen reporting as ordered, sir. Morrison looked up from his desk, and for a moment, Maya thought she saw something unexpected in his expression. Not the impersonal evaluation she had anticipated, but something that looked almost like nervousness. It was so unusual for a colonel to appear uncertain that Maya wondered if she had misread his facial expression. At ease, Chen. Please, have a seat. Maya settled into the chair across from Morrison's desk, maintaining the respectful posture that military protocol required, but trying to project calm confidence despite her internal anxiety. Morrison seemed to be studying her face with unusual intensity, as if he were trying to memorize her features. I've been reviewing your performance records, Morrison began, his voice carefully controlled. Your instructors are unanimous in their assessment that you demonstrate exceptional potential. Your tactical thinking, leadership instincts, and technical competencies are well above average for recruits at your training level. Maya felt a mixture of pride and concern. Praise from a commanding officer was always welcome, but exceptional performance could lead to scrutiny that Maya preferred to avoid. Thank you, sir. I've been working hard to meet the Army's standards. Morrison leaned back in his chair, and Maya noticed that his hands were clasped tightly, as if he were trying to keep them from trembling. Chen, I want to ask you some questions about your background, not for disciplinary reasons, but because understanding our soldiers' experiences helps us provide better training and support. Maya felt her defensive walls rising automatically. Questions about her background inevitably led to uncomfortable territory, and she had become expert at deflecting personal inquiries without appearing uncooperative. Of course, sir. I'll answer anything I can. Tell me about your family history, Morrison said. I know from your records that you were raised in foster care, but I'm curious about your memories from before that time. Maya had been asked this question dozens of times over the years by social workers, therapists, and well-meaning foster parents. Her answer had become automatic. I don't have many clear memories from before I was placed in care, sir. I was very young. Morrison nodded, but Maya could see that he wasn't satisfied with her standard response. Do you remember anything at all? Images, sounds, feelings? Sometimes early memories exist even when we can't access them consciously. Maya hesitated. The truth was that she did have fragments of memory from her early childhood, but they were so vague and emotionally charged that she had learnt not to examine them too closely. Dreams of a woman singing in a language that might have been Chinese. Flashes of practicing strange movements in a garden filled with flowering trees. The sensation of strong hands lifting her high into the air while a man's voice spoke words she didn't understand. Sometimes I have dreams, Maya admitted carefully, but I've never been able to determine if they're actual memories or just wishful thinking. Morrison leaned forward, his intensity increasing. What kind of dreams? Maya felt uncomfortable discussing such personal details with her commanding officer, but Morrison's interest seemed genuine rather than invasive. Dreams about practicing movements, I guess, like exercises or dance steps. And sometimes I dream about a garden with beautiful trees. But dreams aren't reliable sources of information about the past. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, and Maya could see him processing her words with an attention that seemed far beyond normal supervisory interest. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than military protocol usually allowed. Chen, what I'm about to tell you may come as a shock, and I want you to know that regardless of your response, it won't affect your military career or training status. You have my word on that. Maya felt her pulse quicken. Morrison's tone suggested that this conversation was about to move far beyond routine performance review. Morrison opened his desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. His hands were visibly shaking now as he placed it on the desk between them. 24 years ago, I was a young lieutenant stationed in Seoul, South Korea. I met a woman named Li Wei who was working as a translator for the American Embassy. We fell in love, and she became pregnant with my child. Maya's breath caught. The direction of this conversation was so unexpected that she felt like she was falling through empty air. Morrison continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. Li Wei was Chinese, and she had very specific ideas about what would be best for our daughter. She believed that a mixed-race child would face too many challenges in either country, and she wanted our baby to be adopted by a good American family. She made me promise never to look for our daughter, never to interfere with the life she would build with her adoptive parents. Maya felt the world shifting around her, as if everything solid had suddenly become fluid. Sir, I don't understand why you're telling me this. Morrison opened the wooden box and removed a photograph, placing it on the desk where Maya could see it. The image showed a young Asian woman with an infectious smile, holding a small jade bracelet up to catch the light. Maya gasped because something about the woman's face was hauntingly familiar. This is Li Wei, Morrison said gently, and this is the bracelet she wore to commemorate our daughter's birth. The bracelet was engraved with our daughter's name and birth date in traditional Chinese characters. Maya's hand moved unconsciously to her left shoulder, where her tattoo was hidden beneath her uniform. The woman in the photograph had the same bone structure Maya saw in mirrors, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. Morrison noticed Maya's gesture, and his voice became even more gentle. Chen, I saw your tattoo during training exercises yesterday. The design is identical to one that Li Wei showed me before she returned to China. She had it created to represent our daughter's name and birth date. Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. What was your daughter's name? Mei Ling, Morrison said softly. Born March 15th, 2002. Maya's birth date. Her mind raced through fragments of memory and documentation, trying to process the implications of what Morrison was telling her. Are you saying that you think I'm saying that I know you're my daughter, Morrison said firmly. I've spent 24 years wondering what happened to you, and yesterday I discovered that you've been under my command for months. Maya stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The careful emotional control she had maintained for years was cracking under the weight of Morrison's revelation. This is impossible. You're mistaken. The resemblance must be a coincidence. Morrison opened the wooden box again and removed a letter, yellowed with age. This is the last letter Li Wei sent me before she returned to China. She wrote about teaching you traditional movements to build coordination and awareness, exercises her grandmother had taught her. She mentioned that even as a small child, you had exceptional balance and natural grace. Maya's legs gave out, and she sank back into her chair. The dreams she had dismissed as wishful thinking suddenly took on new significance. The movements she practiced in her dreams, the exercises that felt familiar even though she couldn't remember learning them, The instinctive combat techniques that had puzzled her instructors. They weren't random abilities, but inherited knowledge passed down through generations. The woman who taught you those movements, Maya whispered. What did she look like?
Morrison's eyes filled with tears.
Like you. She had your eyes, your way of standing, your habit of pausing to think before speaking. But she also had my stubbornness and my tendency to make decisions based on logic rather than emotion. Maya felt 23 years of questions suddenly beginning to have answers. The sense of incompleteness that had followed her through every foster placement, every temporary living situation, every moment when she watched other people interact with their families. It all made sense if she had spent her entire life unconsciously missing parents she couldn't remember. Why are you telling me this now? Maya asked, her voice barely audible. Morrison's military composure finally cracked completely. Because Li Wei died 3 years ago. And before she died, she sent word that if circumstances ever brought you back into my life, she hoped I would give you the family connections you never had, because I've watched you excel in training while having no idea that your abilities come from a family tradition of strength and resilience. Because you're my daughter, and I've lost 23 years of your life that I can never get back. Maya stared at Morrison, her father, trying to reconcile the commanding officer she had respected from a distance with the idea of a parent who had spent decades wondering about her welfare.
What happens now?
I mean, militarily, you can't be my commanding officer if you're also my father. Morrison nodded. I'll be requesting a transfer to a different base or an early retirement. Your training will continue under different supervision, and your military career will proceed based entirely on your own merits. Our personal relationship, whatever form it takes, will remain separate from your professional development. Maya was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Finally, she looked up at Morrison with a directness that reminded him powerfully of Li Wei. I need time to think about this, Maya said. It's not that I don't believe you, but this changes everything I thought I knew about myself. I need to figure out how to integrate this information with the person I've been for 23 years. Morrison smiled, the first genuine smile Maya had ever seen from him. Take all the time you need. I've waited 20 years to know you. I can wait however long it takes for you to be comfortable with this. Maya stood up again, more steadily this time. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you have more pictures of her? Of Li Wei? I'd like to see what my mother looked like. Morrison's voice was thick with emotion. I have everything she ever gave me. Photos, letters, descriptions of the exercises she taught you, stories about her grandmother who taught her traditional healing and martial arts. It's all yours whenever you're ready. Maya nodded and moved toward the door, then turned back. Colonel Morrison? You can call me James, or Dad, if you ever feel comfortable with that. Maya's eyes filled with tears for the first time since she was a small child. James, thank you for telling me. Thank you for keeping the promise you made to my mother, and thank you for breaking it when the time was right. After Maya left, Morrison sat alone in his office, feeling as if a weight he had carried for more than 2 decades had finally been lifted from his shoulders. His daughter was alive, she was thriving, and she was exactly the kind of person that Li Wei had hoped she would become. Strong, independent, and capable of building her own destiny. Maya walked back to the barracks in a daze, her mind reeling with new information about her identity and origins. For the first time in her life, her exceptional abilities made sense. For the first time, she had answers to questions she had stopped asking years ago. And for the first time, she had a father who wanted to be part of her life. The careful invisibility that had protected Maya for so many years was about to be replaced by something much more complicated, but infinitely more meaningful. She was no longer Maya Chen, the orphaned recruit with mysterious talents. She was Mei Ling Morrison, daughter of Li Wei and James Morrison, inheritor of traditions she was only beginning to understand, and a young woman with a family history that finally explained who she was and where she came from. 3 months after the revelation that changed her life forever, Maya stood in Colonel Morrison's quarters surrounded by boxes of memories she had never known existed. James had requested early retirement from the army, and Maya had completed basic training with honors, earning a recommendation for officer candidate school. Tonight was their last evening at Fort Braxton before they both began new chapters of their lives. The transition had been more complex than either of them had anticipated. Military regulations had required extensive documentation and review when James disclosed his relationship to Maya, but ultimately, the Army had handled the situation with more flexibility than expected. Maya's performance records spoke for themselves, and James's exemplary service record carried enough weight to prevent their family connection from becoming a scandal. Maya had legally changed her name from Maya Chen to Maya Morrison, reclaiming the identity that had been lost 23 years earlier. The process had been emotionally overwhelming but deeply satisfying. For the first time in her life, her official documents reflected a real connection to family rather than the bureaucratic emptiness of foster care records. "Tell me again about the garden where my mother practiced her exercises," Maya said, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a box of Li Wei's letters. She had asked James to repeat certain stories dozens of times, as if hearing them repeatedly could somehow fill in the missing years of family connection. James smiled, settling into his chair with a cup of tea that Maya had prepared using techniques Li Wei had described in her letters. Maya had been teaching herself traditional Chinese tea ceremony from online videos, trying to connect with cultural practices that should have been part of her childhood education. "Your mother's grandmother had a small courtyard behind our house in Beijing," James said, his voice taking on the gentle tone he used when sharing memories of Li Wei. "Li Wei told me it was filled with cherry trees and bamboo, with stone pathways that created perfect circles for practicing forms. Every morning before dawn, Li Wei and her grandmother would practice together Tai Chi, Qigong, and traditional martial arts that had been passed down through their family for generations." Maya closed her eyes, and suddenly the fragments of dreams that had puzzled her for years began to make perfect sense. The flowering trees, the sensation of moving through carefully choreographed patterns, the feeling of being guided by gentle hands. These weren't random images, but actual memories of her earliest years. "She brought you to the garden every morning when you were a baby," James continued. "Li Wei wrote that you would sit perfectly still, watching the movements with the kind of focused attention that surprised everyone. By the time you were 2 years old, you were mimicking the basic forms, moving with balance and coordination that seemed impossible for such a small child." Maya opened her eyes and looked at James with wonder. "That's why combat training felt familiar. That's why I could anticipate movements and understand leverage points. I wasn't learning new techniques, I was remembering ones I had already been taught." James nodded. "Li Wei's grandmother told her that some knowledge is passed through bloodlines, and that certain children are born with an intuitive understanding of principles that take others years to master. She believed you were one of those children." Maya had spent the past 3 months not only processing her family history, but also actively developing the abilities that had been dormant since childhood. James had connected her with Master Chen, a martial arts instructor in the nearest city who specialized in traditional Chinese forms. Under Master Chen's guidance, Maya had begun to unlock layers of knowledge that felt like rediscovering a language she had always spoken but had temporarily forgotten. The progress had been remarkable. Movements that should have taken months to master came naturally to Maya, as if her muscles remembered patterns that her conscious mind had never learned. Master Chen had been amazed by her rapid advancement and had begun teaching her advanced techniques, usually reserved for students with years of experience. "My grandmother would have been proud," Master Chen had told Maya during their last training session. "Your foundation is impeccable, even after years of dormancy. This suggests that your early training was exceptional and that your natural talent is truly rare." But Maya's development hadn't been limited to physical skills. She had also been exploring the philosophical and spiritual aspects of her inherited traditions. Li Wei's letters contained detailed explanations of meditation techniques, breathing exercises, and approaches to mental discipline that were designed to complement physical training. Maya had discovered that these practices helped her focus and remain calm under pressure in ways that enhanced her military performance dramatically. James had also been undergoing his own transformation. Retirement from the army after 28 years of service would have been difficult under any circumstances, but doing so to build a relationship with his newly discovered daughter had given the transition meaning and purpose. He had purchased a house near the base where Maya would attend officer candidate school, creating a permanent home for both of them for the first time in decades. "I have something for you," James said, reaching into the wooden box that had started their journey together. He removed a small silk pouch that Maya had never seen before. "Li Wei asked me to give this to our daughter when she was old enough to understand its significance," James explained, placing the pouch in Maya's hands. "I've been carrying it for 24 years, waiting for this moment." Maya opened the pouch with trembling fingers. Inside was the jade bracelet from the photograph, the one Li Wei had worn to commemorate Maya's birth. The jade was warm to the touch and carved with intricate symbols that seemed to capture light even in the dim room. "The characters represent your full name in traditional Chinese," James said softly. "Mei Ling Morrison, beautiful spirit of the Watchtower family. Li Wei chose your name to honor both your Chinese heritage and your American future." Maya slipped the bracelet onto her wrist and immediately felt a sense of completeness that she had never experienced before. The jade seemed to connect her to generations of women who had worn similar pieces, linking her to a cultural history that extended far beyond her individual story. "There's something else," James said, pulling out a modern envelope with Maya's name written in his own handwriting. "I've been in contact with Li Wei's family in Beijing. Her niece, Lin Wei, has been taking care of Li Wei's possessions and maintaining the family garden. She wants to meet you." Maya looked up in surprise. "I have living relatives in China?" James smiled. "You have a whole extended family that Li Wei told about you before she died. They've been hoping to make contact ever since they learned that you had been found. Lin Wei speaks excellent English, and she's invited both of us to visit Beijing whenever you feel ready to explore that part of your heritage." Maya felt tears welling up in her eyes. After 23 years of believing she had no family connections whatsoever, the idea of having relatives who had been thinking about her and hoping to meet her was almost overwhelming. "I'd like that," Maya said. "Maybe after I finish officer candidate school. I want to be fully established in my military career before I take on any more major emotional challenges." James laughed. "That's exactly the kind of practical thinking that Li Wei would have expected from you. She always said that our daughter would be wise enough to handle big changes at her own pace." They spent the rest of the evening going through Li Wei's letters together, with James translating passages that had been written in Chinese and explaining cultural references that Maya didn't understand. Each letter revealed new details about the woman who had given birth to her and the family traditions that were now Maya's inheritance. One letter, written shortly before Li Wei returned to China, contained a passage that seemed particularly relevant to Maya's current situation. "I hope our daughter will understand that love sometimes requires difficult choices, and that the greatest gift we can give our children is the freedom to become who they are meant to be rather than who we want them to be. If Mei Ling ever finds her way back to you, James, please tell her that every decision I made was guided by my hope for her happiness, not by any lack of love." Maya wiped tears from her cheeks as James finished reading. "She was protecting me, wasn't she? Not just from prejudice or complications, but from having to choose between different parts of my identity before I was old enough to handle that complexity." James nodded. Li Wei understood that being mixed race in the military could create challenges that she wanted to shield you from. But she also knew that if you were anything like either of your parents, you would eventually find your way to the life you were meant to live. Maya stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Fort Braxton, where she had discovered not just her military calling, but her family identity. In a few days, she would begin officer candidate school at a different base, starting the next phase of her military career with a sense of purpose and belonging that she had never imagined possible.
"I keep thinking about something Master Chen said," Maya told James.
"He said that traditional martial arts aren't just about combat techniques, but about understanding your place in the world and honoring the people who came before you. For the first time, I understand what that means." James joined Maya at the window. "Li Wei would be proud of the woman you've become. Not just because of your military achievements or your rediscovered abilities, but because of the way you've handled learning about your past. You've taken the best of what we could give you and built something uniquely your own." Maya smiled, feeling the jade bracelet warm against her wrist. "I used to think that being invisible was the safest way to live, but now I understand that being seen by the right people, being known and accepted for who you really are, that's what makes life worth living." 6 months later, Maya graduated from officer candidate school as the top student in her class. James attended the ceremony wearing his dress uniform, proudly watching his daughter receive her commission as a second lieutenant. In the audience were Master Chen, Lin Wei, who had traveled from Beijing to meet her American cousin, and several of Maya's fellow graduates who had become genuine friends rather than temporary associates. Maya's assignment was to a base in Germany where she would lead a reconnaissance unit, using the strategic thinking and cultural awareness that made her particularly valuable for international operations. James would join her in Germany, where he planned to teach military history at a university, while continuing to help Maya explore her heritage and develop her traditional martial arts skills. After the graduation ceremony, Maya stood with James looking at her commissioning certificate, officially identifying her as Second Lieutenant Mei Ling Morrison. For the first time in her life, her name, her abilities, and her place in the world all made perfect sense. "Li Wei was right," Maya said, thinking about her mother's letter about children becoming who they were meant to be. "I did find my way to exactly where I belonged. It just took me 23 years and a chance encounter with my father's binoculars to get there." James laughed, remembering the moment that had changed both their lives. Some things are too important to remain hidden forever, Family has a way of finding itself, even when all the odds suggest it's impossible. Maya adjusted her new uniform, feeling the weight of her rank insignia and the warmth of her jade bracelet. She was ready for whatever challenges awaited her in Germany, confident that she finally understood not just who she was, but where she came from and where she belonged. The invisible recruit had become a leader who was proud to be seen, and the joke that everyone had missed was that sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true potential. As they walked away from Fort Braxton for the last time, Maya realized that her story wasn't ending but beginning. She had found her father, reclaimed her heritage, and discovered abilities that would serve her throughout her military career. But more importantly, she had learned that family isn't just about shared genetics. It's about people who see your potential and help you become the person you're meant to be. The new recruit was no longer a joke. She was Second Lieutenant Mei-Ling Morrison, daughter of Li Wei and James Morrison, inheritor of ancient traditions and modern opportunities, ready to lead others with the wisdom that comes from understanding exactly who you are and exactly where you belong.